Welcome back to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andy Temte. On the Balancing Act, we talk to business leaders and industry experts to explore the balancing acts we play in our professional lives, and learn about the events that put rocket boosters behind their career success. Today, we have Hannah Dannecker joining us. Hannah is managing partner at the Better Together group of companies, a portfolio of North American recruitment and staffing agencies. Hannah is also the author of, Time to Grow Up. That's my own personal version of a bleep. So you can fill in whatever you want there. Today, we're going to focus on learning more about Gen Z and the world of work. Welcome to the show, Hannah.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm excited to be here. This will be a great episode.
Yeah, it will be a great episode, I am sure. I like to get perspectives from folks all around the employment spectrum, and I believe you're my first Gen Z guest, so we're breaking some ground here.
Very exciting. I'm excited to bring some new perspective to the group and chat with your listeners. This will be fun.
Excellent. Mm-hmm. So, Hannah, before we get started, please tell our listeners the short version of your story.
Yeah, the short version of my story, I was born in Canada, so just north of Toronto, and had a very normal, very average upbringing of a person who lived in Canada. So my very first job was on a ski resort, and I lived close enough to the top of the hill I could walk over and put on my snowboard and snowboard down the hill. So that was my first job ever. And then you fast forward a handful of years, I had a passion for the South and a hate for the snow. So I moved to Florida pre-pandemic while I was in the midst of finishing my degree here. And I moved in with a stranger from the internet that I had never met before, which was fun. But she was a professional wakeboarder, and she gave me some great lessons and some great gear. And I had a reason to be in love with the South after that. For a little while, it was just like a desire to be hot. And then I got into this sport and fell in love with it and was able to compete in it, which was really fun. But then the pandemic happened, and I'm from a family business. So naturally, I moved back to Canada. I had just finished my degree, and I was working for my family business. If there's any time to do it, a global pandemic was the time. I never really anticipated doing that, but I had a passion for kids and for teaching because while I was in Florida, I had always been an instructor through lots of different things, but I also became a substitute teacher while I was here. And so as I had moved back and was in the family business at home, I loved what my father had created, but the people around me were much older than I was, and the environment was challenging for me to stay in. There was a lot of things that kind of needed to happen, and a really big rub between me and kind of just the environment, the always in the office, the 9 to 5, the typical lifestyle. And so I was talking to my dad about it, and I was like, hey, love you, love this. I need a couple of things to change, though, if I can continue to show up and be the best employee for you that I can be. And so he was fantastic and accepted that. And we made a couple changes internally that really completely flipped my perspective on a lot of things and allowed me to see the joy of what we were doing. And then we brought a bunch of Gen Zs in. We started doing internships with a ton of different people, and I absolutely loved it. And then from there, I started speaking to different professionals about how to hire and retain Generation Z. And that kind of led me to the place where we are today, talking about it.
Excellent. Well, that's going to be the focus of our conversation. You may not have felt this, but it's very courageous of you to go back into what many would paint as a traditional office environment and say, hey, something's got to change. Of course, you had a very unique voice, daughter to father, but many people can find that voice within them. Talk to their leaders, talk to their managers about what a great work environment means to them, and I think we would have a much more robust world of work if we all screwed up a little bit more courage and had those conversations. So really interesting story. Love the snowboard. You're able to just walk over and strap on your snowboard and get to work.
And now I live in Florida. So while I was in the midst of that, I met somebody, fell in love, and I moved back to Florida afterwards, after we made all those transitions and changes in the company that allowed me to do so. And now I get alligators in my backyard. So it's a funny transition. I like to think of the craziness between the two worlds.
Yeah. So if you had to pick one event in your life that was just a key accelerant for you in your career, what would that be? There was a time, I think it was 3-ish years ago now, when I had attended a conference called Staffing World. And at that time it was in Vegas. It kind of transitions every which way. And it was before I had started publicly speaking, and I was still, I believe, our marketing manager at the Better Together group. And I was loving what I was doing, and I had lots of ideas about what we could do, but I was scared. I was scared to voice an opinion. I was scared to ask for stuff. I was scared to pretend or feel. I wouldn't be pretending. It was feeling like I had the input that was valuable to other people. And I sat down in a presentation that they were offering, and it talked a lot about imposter syndrome. And they were talking about how imposter syndrome to most people is deemed as a big red light. And it's meaning this, that they see it and they get scared and they stop doing whatever it is that they were doing. But this woman, and I wish I knew who it was, I don't remember who it was, but she was speaking about how you have to see imposter syndrome as a warning light rather than a stop sign. And how when it's coming at you, you need to see it. You need to be aware. This is different. This is new. This is challenging. And so you approach it with the understanding that it is new and it is scary, but that doesn't mean you stop. You just do it with caution. You do it intentionally, but you continue to move forward. And that flipped my entire life, to be honest with you. I had been working on my very first book at the time, and they had encouraged you to just kind of continue going. And I felt so under-impressive myself. Just the concept that who am I to be writing a book? I was 22 years old. Like, no one was going to read it. But I started it to give to my kids one day. They were the main audience. So of course they were going to read it. Why would I not finish it? And that kind of cycled into the way that I saw everything about life. And just, okay, this is perhaps scary, perhaps new, but it doesn't mean I need to stop. It just means I need to step forward with caution. That's wonderful. So many of us see imposter syndrome, or whatever label you want to put on it, and stop and don't go any further. Oh, I don't belong there. So I love that caution, that yellow light metaphor. So much to talk about today, but let's start with Gen Z. Yes, Give us a primer on the definition. And while you're giving us the definition, what are two key priorities of the average Gen Zer? I don't want to stereotype too much, but think about the average Gen Zer. What are two top priorities? I appreciate that. I appreciate the disclaimer that not all of them are the same. That's good. Right. So Generation Z, so there's 72 million of them. They're born between 1997 and 2012. I am very proud to be one. And they really crave flexibility because of the way that things happened through the pandemic. When they were just starting their careers, they kind of understood that they had this sense of flexibility. The government demanded it, that they be from home. And so they came into their careers with the sense that it was available and applicable and actually could sometimes help them. And so that is very, very different and unique of Generation Z, and challenging for some other generations as well. But then other than that, the funny thing about Gen Zs is that they really crave respect. And this is also challenging for other generations, because previously it's been that you come into the workforce and you earn respect. And Generation Z is coming into the workforce saying, I want to have respectful conversations and communication before anything else. Yes, I will do what needs to be done. Yes, you are still my superior. But if you don't talk to them and treat them with complete respect, they'll have no respect for you to begin with, and they'll probably just leave, which is very different because before it was earned. So those are the two very fundamentally funny, if you want to call them, things about Gen Z. Yeah, let's dive into that phrase, and just leave. I've seen some of that play out where I'm done. I don't feel respected, so I'm just going to leave. Literally at a volunteer organization I work with, a Post-it note on the desk. I'm done. I'm gone.
Yeah.
What? How should a leader process that?
I would say first with internal reflection, and this is so hard to do. Most Gen Zs will give you exactly what you're giving them. And not always. Sometimes a Generation Z is going to treat you with disrespect when you have not treated them disrespectfully. But most often they will give you exactly what you are giving them. And so if you receive something that you deem as disrespectful, I would first ask yourself, have I been disrespectful to them? And the answer may be no. And that is perfectly fine. And you can continue on the exact path that you need to. But if this is happening to you really regularly, I would definitely be looking at yourself first.
That is awesome. Our listeners have heard me say this many times, but if I'm pointing a finger at you, 3 more are pointing back at me. So always
Yes.
the art of self-reflection is very important. So Hannah, I'm a late baby boomer, born in 1963. Can you help let's talk about some myth busting. We're gonna play a little thought experiment. I'm gonna give you a magic wand. So I'm slipping it through the video right now. What's the most prominent trope regarding Gen Z that you can sweep away with this magic wand?
Yeah, I think most people think that Gen Z is very lazy, which is not the case. Generation Z works very smart, and previous generations have worked very hard. And again, not to stereotype, everybody is different and everything is different. But Gen Z has been raised through a time where automation and AI and processes properly playing out has been really large and in their face. And so for us to play smart makes a lot of sense. How can I make the most out of my time and get the most out of every single thing that I am doing? And that, for other generations, doesn't always come across as working really hard because they have been the roll your sleeves up and get your hands in it and get the dang job done. And there is nothing wrong with either side. And I think that they work really well together. But when they come from different places, it can be really challenging to understand what's going on. So I think most generations see Gen Z and they think that we're really lazy, but we're working very differently than they have ever understood before.
Yeah. So back in 2022, I ran a 5 or 6 show mini-series entitled Nobody Wants to Work Anymore. This was it's only 2 years ago, but everybody was running around grousing about service primarily. Nobody wants to work anymore. Now, granted, you can go back 20 years ago, and there are articles with the same titles. You can go back 40 years ago, and there are articles with the same title. So every generation thinks the generations that come after them are lazy and they don't want to work. So this rolls through time.
Right.
But let's do another thought experiment before we take a break. You've got a baby boomer like me, so I'm sitting right in front of you, or a Gen Xer who believes that Gen Z is the primary culprit here, and they're the ones that don't want to work anymore. Let's talk more about that perspective. What do you say to them to set the record straight?
So typically what I tell people is that I want you to listen to learn. I want you to learn to understand, and then I want you to understand to speak. Oftentimes, when we are talking to somebody that we don't know very well, we make assumptions based on what they're saying really quickly. And so that could look like a employer asking somebody who's applying for a job, how many hours do you typically work on a regular basis? And that person saying 5 hours a day. And the employer going, this person's lazy. They only work 5 hours a day. They don't work 8 hours a day, and they completely move on. Rather than going, that's so interesting. What do you typically get done? And then them explaining to you and saying, oh, normally that would take 8 hours a day. How do you do that? And then the person going, oh, well, I've used this process. I've used this system. I've used this AI bot of some sort or another to be more productive in some way. So I want you to listen to learn to understand. And then once you understand is when you get to start speaking. But sometimes it's just a barrier of not necessarily being able to communicate with each other.
Yeah. I use the phrase seek to understand very, very frequently. So I like that you have placed speaking at the end of the string, because that is literally the last thing that a leader should do. But we've all been trained to jump right into the conversation and try to add value right away instead of taking a half halt, listening, and then engaging in the conversation. Hannah, we're going to take a really short commercial break, and we'll be right back with Hannah Dannecker talking about Gen Z and the workplace. Hey, it's Andy here. I've got a new podcast I'd like to introduce you to, The Saturday Morning Muse. Start your weekend with me by exploring topics that span leadership, business management, education, and other musings that are designed to support your journey of personal and professional continuous improvement. Subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform. And we're back with Hannah Dannecker talking about Gen Z and the workplace. So let's shift our thought experiments just a little bit. Suppose you have the hiring manager of a random mid-sized company sitting right in front of you right now. You get to give them 2 pieces of advice on hiring members of Gen Z. What are those 2 pieces of advice?
I would say hiring a Gen Z is not unlike hiring anybody else, to be honest with you. You're hiring a person who's sitting across from you on the other side of the table. And it's important to remember to take into account who that person is. Yes, you want to use the job ads or the job boards that they're looking on and kind of be aware of that. But more than anything, it's just about the person across from you. So I would say first, look at personality. Generation Z is the youngest people in the workforce, so they have had the least amount of time to gain experience. But if you can find the right personality, you can do a lot of things to train that person right. And so that is really helpful. And then honestly, outside of that, just have respectful conversations. Again, listen to learn to understand, try to get to the meat of what they're saying rather than just look at the sheet and the resume in front of you, because they might not have necessarily learned how to yet share their value well. They might be so junior in their role that they are still intimidated by interviews or scared, but they might have a lot more potential than they're letting on because you're just not there yet in the conversation. But those would be my first 2 pieces for Gen Zs or just new people to the workforce.
Yeah. So let's talk about learning just a bit here. So extending on that, those 2 pieces of advice, you have the same hiring manager. It's 2024, later 2024, and hopefully everybody's wrapping their minds around the fact that we all need to be lifelong learners. We need to be continually honing our skills. What does Gen Z think about the concept of lifelong learning, and what are they looking for from their employer when they first enter the world of work in terms of a learning agenda?
Mm-hmm. So Gen Z is very different in the way that they see learning and education. 72% of Gen Z say that there's a better way to get an education than going to university, which is not surprising because they were raised with a cell phone right in their hand. It is always at fingertips. And so it's funny to them to have the concept of higher education because they've been able to answer so many of their questions for as long as they can remember just from the device that's sitting at their fingertips. And so having a resource that's available to your Gen Zs to answer very silly questions is really helpful. Some employers have things set up in their companies internally that block a lot of outside computer use. So you'll come in, you'll have a computer, and you can't have it was originally set up for social medias, right? No Facebook, no Instagram, that kind of thing. And there are great resources to do that for. There are sites that people don't need to be on at work. But when you block out the Wikipedias or the Reddits or stuff like that, it can be really challenging for Gen Zs because you're blocking off this resource that's been available to them for a really long time. So making that available is really important. And then offering them stuff, but not forcing, just like you would with any other person, is creating opportunities for them to have it, but not forcing them into it. I think that external piece of applicable little information is more important because that'll get really challenging on their day by day. But offering people education externally, formalized education, is valuable regardless.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, I grew up in an era of here's 12 inches of employee binders that you've got to read through. What I'm hearing is if you've still got that hiring and learning mentality in your onboarding process, you should think twice.
That will be challenging for sure, but offer them that sheet of information and then teach them how to use Control Find so they can search for the keywords they need. But that's probably the difference between smart and hard is previously that person might sit down and read through every single word of that. And now I would rather just look back and find it when I need it. So it's funny to see the difference.
Yeah. Okay. So let's shift our thought experiment. Now you have a member of Gen Z, another member of Gen Z sitting right in front of you, and they're discouraged and disillusioned by today's job market, mounting housing cost, and specifically the flood of rhetoric in the media that they're not ready for the world of work. Mm-hmm. What advice do you have for them to help them adopt a more positive outlook for their future?
Mm-hmm. I would say it is not always this way. While, yes, costs will continue to rise and things will continue to look different, we are sitting in the middle of a very weird recession. And it's not always going to be like this. And so we're graduating, most Gen Zs are graduating through post-pandemic world and recession times. And so there's a lot of fear from Generation Z right now, just terrified about what the world will look like, if they'll ever move out of their parents' house, if they'll ever get the job that does the thing that they've always wanted to do. It is coming. It will be available. It will not always look this way, is the best piece of advice I can give them. It's
Excellent.
Challenging to see, though.
Yeah. So same member of Gen Z sitting in front of you. What's the most important skill that they should be working on to ensure that they are indeed ready for work?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would recommend you go check out my book. It's very boomer endorsed. You'd all love it. Well, it's shoot, but not spelt like shoot. You would need the bleep for it, but you can find it on Amazon. Yeah, read that. That's my guidebook to life, basically. But I would say specifically about if you're looking to have one thing. Unfortunately, this is going to be two things. But if you can balance communicating with people and working on computer programs, you'll be fine. Whatever that is, whichever field you're coming into, if you can manage people, teach people, work with people, but just communicate. If you can communicate with people and you can communicate with computers in some way, shape, or form, if that's the processes that you're using, if that's programming, if that's whatever that looks like. But if you can do both, you'll be very set up for the future. But if you can only do one or the other, you're going to limit your capabilities moving forward.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. So Hannah, as we start to close things out, we're going to have a little fun. I ask all my guests these questions, 2 lightning round questions. I give you access to a time machine and you can send a message to an earlier version of yourself. What's the message and what previous version of yourself do you send it to?
I send it to my childhood self at the age of, as soon as I'd be able to remember it, let's say 5. Perfection paralyzes the process of progress. I have been a perfectionist as long as I can remember, and it kept me from moving forward in so many things. So if I could just teach myself that perfection paralyzes you from the process of moving forward. That would have saved me a lot of time moving through life for sure.
Yeah, perfection is the enemy of excellence, for sure. Well, Hannah, we are all works in progress. I'm later life, but I'm still learning, growing. You're a little earlier. What are you focused on right now in your personal journey of growth as a leader?
I am trying really hard to be present. I am a double, triple, quadruple screen kind of gal. I love to be super proactive and get stuff done. But in the last little while, that's caused me to be not as connected to the people that are actually in front of me. And so I'm trying really hard to be present wherever I am.
That's fantastic. So, Hannah, where can folks find you and your book, your business? Where can folks learn more?
Yeah, check it out. X2Z.org is the best website. It's got links to everything else, all of the different books that we've done, the business, and a bunch of other podcasts that I do as well. So you can find everything and anything there.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. This was really insightful.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
Wonderful. My name is Andy Temte. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us on all the major streaming services as well as YouTube. Please like, subscribe, rate, and most importantly, share this public good with your friends, your colleagues, and we will see you next time on the Balancing Act.